Hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here and really lucky to be interviewing Carrie Conaway, who's a senior lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and was former Chief Strategy and Research Officer at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Carrie, thanks so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and really wanted to understand about like your professional trajectory. And so, do you mind sharing with us like what has been your professional experiences and what you've learned being in this industry?
Sure. Ever since when I look back, honestly, back to high school, I think I kind of had a researchy bent to me. I was always interested in writing and in understanding the world around me. So those two things I think are either journalism or research, basically. And when I was an undergraduate, I was a sociology major and I did a senior thesis. So I did a research project and I really loved doing that. So my very first job out of undergrad was a research assistant. Um, Ultimately, I worked for a couple of years actually on a study of Alzheimer's disease, totally separate from
Hmm.
this, but decided I really wanted to focus on labor policy and employment. So I got an MPP from the University of Minnesota in policy analysis and labor policy. And again, found that I really liked the research part of the work, the data analysis. And at the time, it sort of felt like, well, if you like doing that, you should get a PhD. That's what people do when they have PhDs, right? That's what they're for. So that was when I applied to more grad school and ultimately enrolled at Harvard at what, and this is a long and complicated story. The short version is that I was in a sociology and social policy joint program, which so I completed 3 years of that program and I found that I hated it. And it turned out that the fundamental problem, I think, for me was that if you've ever heard of the 80-20 rule, where like 80% of the answer, you get 20% of the effort, and the additional 20% of the answer requires 80% of the effort.
Mm.
Being like a PhD level researcher is 100% of the answer and 100% of the effort. And that was not for me. Like 90% of the answer and 50% of the effort, sure, but not. Anyway, so it didn't feel like a good match for my career trajectory.
Mm.
So I went first, I worked at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston for 5 years, first as a journalist for a magazine they put out, and then as the deputy director of a research center on New England public policy issues. And I worked there 5.5 years or so and always felt like I wanted my work to have more impact, like be more directly affecting policy. And a position came open at the State Department of Ed as the what turned out to be the first director of research that the agency had ever hired for the K to 12 education agency. And I had no education background at all. But I did have this interest in labor, which is related, it's not wildly different. And then I had this report that I'd written on energy policy, which has nothing to do with this. And my argument was basically if I can write this on a topic I know nothing about and don't care about, imagine what I could do on a topic that I'm at least interested in. And apparently it worked because I got the job. And that was in 2007. And then I was at the state until 2019.
Mm.
And I basically had the same type of role the whole time. It was always planning and research. My scope grew and grew. My title got elevated and whatever. But basically, I was running the research shop and the strategic planning shop for the agency for 12 years.
And what did that entail, at least moving through the ladder? You said that, more and more tasks got put on your
Yep.
plate. So what are these tasks, especially for our students who might not know what the things are that they should be expecting if there's an opportunity for them to be in this type of role?
Excuse me. Sure. So my team, when I started, I was the Office of Planning and Research. There were no staff. And then shortly thereafter, they moved a couple positions that were sort of analyst adjacent in, like a
Mm.
guy who had kind of a finance background, somebody who had a program evaluation background. And so that started to build out the team a little bit. We started writing some policy briefs and doing some original data analysis. Then the special ed office funded a position. So we had a position focused just on students with disabilities and doing analytical work to help support their planning. And so, like, it was a combination of project based work and then, like, the agency would decide to take on an initiative and they knew they would need
Mhm.
someone who could help support their analytical thinking. Um, at one point, I ran the accountability part of the accountability system where we would send teams of like retired superintendents and principals out to school districts to do observations
Mm.
and then provide reports on for sort of continuous improvement. Um, Later in my career there, I started this federal grants office function reported to me because they wanted people to use those dollars strategically in alignment with our strategy. So I was trying to pull those things together. Anyway, so the kinds of roles that we would have had on my team typically were we had some folks who were quite technical. I had two people with PhDs who were either working with academic researchers or doing very technical, like psychometric work. But more commonly, they were policy analyst folks who were really good at um, analyzing qualitative and quantitative data and synthesizing research from that exists out in the world and
Mm.
stakeholder feedback and those types of things and pulling them together to help policy teams inform their work. Um, there were other data analyst offices, though, around the agency. I didn't manage all the data analysts.
Mhm.
There were also a team of people who did federal reporting and data collection and did, if we were like developing new measures, they were often the people who were doing the sort of research on that. We had a team that did nothing but student assessment work. So using our state test data, and then a group of people who did all those federal accountability designations around like, is this a school that needs improvement or is it on track? That kind of thing.
Mhm.
So I often thought about if you think of an analyst as someone who has statistical software on their computer,
Yeah.
we had about 40 people out of about 400, 450 people had SPSS on their computer. So,
Wow.
and the
And
reason,
this is
before
statewide,
we go
right?
on, the reason that is true is because in education at the state level, your kids come in data form. You're not directly in front of kids, right? So you have to be at least a little bit proficient with quantitative data in order to do work at the policy level.
Yeah, and with that, I guess we can shift to me asking you about like what technical and professional skills do you think people in those types of roles really need to have and
Yeah.
would benefit from having?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you when I was hiring for my team, what I was
Mhm.
looking for, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the other teams. But
Mhm.
for me, because we're in this role of synthesis and like answering people's direct questions and kind of this very research oriented work, I needed not just someone who could crunch numbers. Um, and in fact, so one thing I always looked for was someone who had taken at least one methods or data class beyond what was required of them in their program because I wanted someone who could have chosen any course and picked that, right? But what didn't matter as much was the level because truly a large chunk of the work was descriptive analysis.
Mhm.
Um, you didn't, it was good to understand regression and some of the variations of regression and that kind of thing because you might be reading papers that include that. You might come across a project where you need to control for things or, that sort of thing. That way of thinking is helpful, but very few people on my team were running regressions every day. A couple were, but not many. Um, but so at least one course beyond what you had to take in methods coupled with ability to communicate clearly about research, whether that was qualitative or quantitative, and whether in writing or verbally. So I would ask for writing samples. We would have them do performance tasks where they had to not just crunch numbers, but also interpret and apply and that sort of thing. Um, and the last thing I looked for was people who were perceptive, because in the end, a lot of it is human work and being perceptive about like what's happening in this meeting, who do I need to reach out to about what to make sure they're not, surprised. That sort of working within organizations. Now, the other shops, that type of social relational stuff was still important, but less so.
Mhm.
Those jobs were more focused on more data analytic work. They had like all those people were running data analysis and regressions every day.
Mhm.
Still probably largely descriptive, but they were more focused on the quantitative analysis and interpretation as opposed to the application to policy.
Yeah. And I like what you mentioned, this ability to interpret numbers, that it's not just about crunching numbers and then showing a nice figure and so on. It's really about what's the story behind the numbers
Hmm.
that we're talking about. I've interviewed some people for this as well, and a good number of them have talked about uh this idea of having some sort of content knowledge, or content and context knowledge. How
Hmm.
important is that for the type of work that happens in the state level?
Oh. Well, that's such an interesting question because, as I just said, I had no education background
Yeah, yeah.
before I got this job. So now this was in 2007. So the field of education data analysis just was not as large as it
Mm,
is today. I don't know that you could, I'd be competing against a lot of people who did have that knowledge now, and that was less true almost 20 years ago.
mhm,
Um, but that being said, the large majority of the people I hired came with education background of
mm,
some sort. Um, it it is how I spent my whole first year being like, what is this curriculum framework you keep talking about? Like, it seems very important to you, but I don't know what it is, you know? So it would save you all that time that I had to learn on the job. Like, what are the
mhm,
key policy issues in education? And I had not taken, for example, a psychometrics class. So I had to learn all of that way of doing data analysis
mm.
outside of a classroom setting. So I think if you know you want to work in education or in government, it is definitely helpful to get some exposure to the content that you're likely to be working in. I would agree. And I was very lucky that it worked out for me despite that.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that because now I'm in a new context. I'm in California, and the amount of stuff I need to learn about California state education is
Yeah.
just immense. And I'm still learning a lot, and I'm already in my third year here, right? So,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
yeah. I remember it took me a good year into the job because you feel like you're contributing negatively to the productivity of everyone else around you, where you're like, could you please explain? And it took me a whole year before someone on the data analysis team like came to me with a question instead of me going to them with a question. And I was like, all right, I made it finally.
Yeah. Now, I know that you have one tool that
Yeah.
you were able to share with me. So I was hoping you can talk about that. So this is the DESI's district analysis and review tool that you mentioned. Like what were things that were happening behind the scenes? How did you create that? Um, our students are gonna learn like creating dashboards as well. Like what are the things that they should be thinking about when creating tools like these?
Oh, this is a fun project for me to talk about. This is from early in my time at the agency, but it was a great example of how the power of not just raw data, but the way you present it can make such a difference in its usability. So the context is that I think this was maybe in like 2009 or something, a couple of years into my time at the agency, we got a new deputy commissioner who was coming directly from a state super or school superintendent role. And she came to me and she said, when I was a superintendent, like it's so great. The agency publishes all this data on its website, but it's not usable at all for superintendents. And the reason was what it publishes is these very flat, sort of like imagine a row is a school district, and the column is like the scaled score on the MCAS or the percent of kids that are economically disadvantaged or whatever, like times so it's a different page for every year is a different page. There's filters on subgroups. In fact, I can just show you if that's okay. I will show
Yeah.
folks what this looks like, and why with a problem we were trying to solve. But first I have to remember how to share. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. And all right. All right. Can you see what I'm showing here?
Yes.
All right. So this is the kind of table I'm describing.
This is
Uh,
the one before you
yes.
came in. Okay.
Yes, this is the before. And so this is great if what you want to do, I believe I'm looking at the Abington Public Schools here, and you want to know how did the third graders do on the MCAS this year? You could easily look up and see, oh, they got 31% meeting or exceeding relative to the state of 42.
Mm.
But if you wanted to know how did this year's third graders do relative to last year's third graders, you've got to like go up in these menus, and they've actually changed the website, but like you have to like click around a bunch and arrows, and it's super annoying. Or if you want to be like, how did our school district do relative to this other school district that we think of as comparable to us? It was really hard to do. And so you could do it, but you had to be the kind of person who would know how to download all the Excel spreadsheets and would know how to merge them together. And by the way, the schools and districts don't stay exactly the same. So it's kind of tricky. It's not, people open and close schools. And it was really, really difficult for people to use these data for anything that was analytical. And so she said to me, like, could you do something? Could you like make a better tool that would help people be able to compare themselves over time and themselves relative to others? And I was like, sure. And now, funny sidebar about this is that the IT folks, I went to them, I was like, hey, we've got this idea. Can you build this? And they were like, this will cost, I forget, it was 200,000, some ridiculous amount of money they charged us, they said they would charge us. And then I went to my staff person who was a whiz with Excel and Access. And I was like, do you think you could build this? And she was like, oh, yeah, I can totally build that. And so she built it in Excel. So for years, we published Excel files that people would download. Um, and all it cost was part of her time, which I was already being paid for. But now they have made it into a web thing because it was so popular. By the way, they didn't charge us for it once we had demonstrated its value. And so now they have this cool tool called the Dart, which sort of looks similar at the start here. But notice that instead it's showing you enrollment data, demographic data, and some
Mm.
performance data relative to other school districts. And so it's helping you pick what school district is like mine that I might want to pick. We've suggested 10 that we think are similar based on this was a case where we did run a regression to try to
Mm.
help group people to appropriate peer groups. But you could be like, well, okay, I'm Abington and I don't really think any of these are relevant to me. I would rather compare myself to Acton Boxborough for some reason. I don't know why you would pick that, but that's fine. And so you pick a district that you want to compare.
Mm.
And now look, you can see 5 years of data in both table form and in graph form, the two districts you're interested in and the state on a bunch of different indicators. They've got, in this case, enrollment, the percent of students who stay in the district the whole year. There's some things around like the number of school age residents that are enrolled. And then you can use the tools over on the side here if you want to look at like how do we
Mm.
compare our MCAS scores. You can click into that.
And
There's a
this is the
bunch of,
standardized test scores, right?
yeah, this is the
Okay.
standardized test scores,
Yeah.
but there's also things like under student support, how do we compare on our attendance rates? How do we compare on suspensions,
Mm.
dropout, graduation? There's a bunch. There's probably 100 or something indicators that you can compare. And then you can compare at the school level, not just the district level, that kind of thing. So it's just much, much, much easier for people to actually see themselves in the data and be able to apply it and use it.
Mhm.
And when I'm no joke, when we took this out to school districts at like the State Superintendents Association to demonstrate, we got standing ovations. That is how bad the state's data was before and how little it takes to actually make it useful for people, right? It took the ability to compare yourself to a relevant
Mm.
comparison and to have things kind of all in one place and not have to click around a million things. And it really, I mean, that's a pretty simple dashboard. They actually also now have a Power BI thing that's much fancier, and I don't actually know how to use as well because they developed it after I left. So I didn't want to show it today. But for like the sort of like, what did the state of the art in 2010 look like on a dashboard? That's what that is.
And it's really that simplicity, right? That becomes almost supportive of usability,
Yeah,
for especially for practitioners. And
yeah,
this idea of being able to compare yourself through time and through with other peers or other districts. Were there other lessons that you took from creating like a dashboard like that that I think your our students will benefit from knowing.
Yeah. I think data is only meaningful within a context and a scale. And that's why the comparison is so important. People don't know whether something is big or small, um, high or low until they have a comparison point. And so, in some way, that has to be an element of it. Um, Usability helps, but relevance helps a lot more. Like
Mhm.
our thing, I would not say was super usable, especially the Excel thing, because we were limited by what Excel could do. And yet we had every people would, if we were like a day late on posting that thing, we'd be getting emails from superintendents like, we need the data, please send us the dart. And we actually developed some sub darts that were like a deeper look at college and career readiness, a deeper look at English learners for people who were interested in those, because people just found it so useful. So those are a few things. I think, there's lots of resources and materials now on like how to do really good dashboard design, and you can do a lot more visually, I think, to make it accessible, excuse me, than it used to be, that we were able to do. But before any of that is the relevance and usability for people.
Great. Uh, any last maybe things you want to leave our students with who are really studying um, computational social science, but with a view towards education and social impact.
Yeah. Um, Welcome to our field. It is a wonderful group of humans who care a lot about making the world a better place and see a value for research and data. I think it's a great place, I think, to work if you do love data, because my experience of educators is that they very much appreciate data and research, but maybe don't necessarily have a ton of training on their own to know how to do sophisticated things with it. But they can be good question askers that will help you think of, oh, what if we thought about producing a report that looks like this? Or, oh, I see how that idea could translate into a report I could produce or an analysis I could do. And so if you're able to like listen to their questions and turn it into something you can actually give them back, they will be immensely appreciative. And I think it will really go a long way to helping the field of education improve.
Mhm. And do you mind also maybe encouraging people when they are in these roles to join AEFP? I know you were
Oh,
a
yeah.
previous president of that.
Yes, AEFP is the Association of Education, Finance, and Policy. It's a professional association for people who are interested in research on education policy. So a lot of the members are researchers, but we have many, many members who are working in school districts or state agencies or nonprofits who are also in research roles. It's a great way to get up to speed through the annual conference on the state of the research. So like when I worked at the agency, I would go to AEFP thinking, I know we're going to do a big initiative on teacher qualifications next year. Let me go to all the papers, all the sessions that are about teacher quality, or this year it looks like early college is going to be a big thing. And so you can quickly see what's the state of the art on the research and who's working in that space that might want to partner with you or could connect you with someone. And it's just a very lovely group of people also because they work in education. So they're nice humans. Um, and they also produce a journal, and they also do uh, I forget what they call it, like communities of practice, kind of, and one of which is for policymakers and practitioners. So there's even a subgroup specifically for people working in practice settings who are interested in this work.
And just professionally as well, they get to meet individuals there.
Yeah,
I got to meet you kind of there, but also outside. But this is
yeah.
really great. Carrie, thanks so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Glad to talk with you.